I always thought I'd die in the line of duty, caught in the crossfire of the endless gang wars or riots that were part of my daily life. But as a cop in Vanguard City, I was ready for it. I could still remember life as it was, before war even existed as an idea. Then they came and destroyed all that we had. They took our children as their own and made us slaves. I couldn't even save her.
Layla! I'm going out there to find my daughter.
We're not gonna find her. You're a goddamn fool.
Don't you fucking say that!
They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Imitation in and of itself isn't a negative thing. In fact, it happens all the time in gaming. Look at Saints Row. What started off as a GTA clone managed to evolve itself over time and create its own identity. And that's the key. In gaming, it's incredibly rare to see something that hasn't been done before. It's about taking what works from other games and either improving it or offering enough change to make it your own. This brings me to Inversion, a cover-based third-person shooter with its standout gimmick being the ability to alter gravity. Now, conceptually, this is actually a pretty cool idea. Fighting enemies in zero-gravity environments or on different planes can be a trippy experience that you rarely, if ever, get to see in games. And it makes for some of the best parts of the entire experience. However, the amount of time spent being a basic cover shooter far outweighs its unique aspects, making it feel like a Gears of War clone rather than its own game. Some games like the aforementioned Saints Row manage to break the mold and develop into something more, whereas Inversion seems just fine with being a competent clone. Starting at perhaps the best aspect of the game, the story. While a simple premise with even simpler motivations, where the game goes with it is a bit unexpected and it can be an incredibly enjoyable ride. The opening scene starts off as one of those start at the end type games where you see the predicament your character's in just to cut back to the beginning of the story to show you how you got in that situation. You play as Davis Russell, a Vanguard City police officer alongside your partner Leo Delgado, played by an AI or co-op partner if you have friends. You're on your way to drop off a present for your daughter Layla when shit hits the fan. Lootadors, who are basically just beefy people with face paint and red armor, start invading from seemingly underground. They possess these vests called gravelings which allow them to modify gravity, and gravity seems to be breaking in certain areas, though it's not explained why this is happening or if it's linked to the use of gravelings at all. With all of this happening, you rush to your apartment to try to find your wife and kid. You find your wife bleeding out on the floor, but before she can tell you where Layla is, she dies. As you're grieving, you're cornered and captured by lootadors. You hear your daughter scream for you, but then you're knocked out. When you wake up, you're in a prison camp, and then you get a tutorial on the Gravlink because, for some reason, the lootadors trust you to go into their cave system unsupervised with their most powerful equipment. This leads you to a small boss fight against a security drone. After defeating it, you see a possible escape, but before you can leave, the lootadors come down and take you back to your cells. Later that night, you get help from another prisoner to escape, and this is where the game truly begins.
Yeah, so, listen. This is where we split up. Thanks again. Couldn't have got out of there without you.
Are you crazy? I'm going with you. I'm gonna go find your daughter.
No, I'll move faster on my own.
Like hell you will.
You just said so yourself. You couldn't have got out there on your own. Now you're thinking of going in there solo? No, we're partners. You sure about this? No, not really.
Your main motivation is to find your daughter, and Leo promises to help you since you're partners. From here I'll be getting into some spoilers, but I'll avoid the ending to leave something for you in case you're interested in the game. In any case, I'll leave a timestamp on the screen in case you'd rather just skip all of the spoilers. And if you're interested in the ending, the wiki does do a great job of summing up everything that happened in the game. I like their dynamic even if the characters are a bit one-dimensional, especially Davis, which refuses to see the big picture as he only really cares about saving his daughter. I'm not a father, so maybe I just don't understand, but this dude doesn't seem to stop to think about anything, to the point that it doesn't seem like he really even cares if he puts an end to the invasion. He acts like he can just save his daughter and run off to be happy forever. And it seems like I'm not the only one to find this annoying, as even Leo starts to get irritated with how often he ignores the big picture. He starts shaking his head, rolling his eyes, and even gets into a small fight with him, telling him that he'll never find his daughter and he's a damn fool if he thinks he will.
Yeah, you're right. Gotta be right on her trail. We'll find her.
Look, let's just focus on stopping these guys first. It's the only way everyone's gonna be safe.
You can focus on saving the world, but I have one goal here and only one.
I think they did some cool stuff with the twists and reveals, though some of the ideas were cool in concept, but kind of left plot holes. Plus the lack of any clear motivation for the bad guys or even a leader until the end of the game makes it feel like the lootadors just weren't all that fleshed out and honestly played more of a B-roll to the story than actually taking center stage despite them being the main bad guys. They're just incredibly uninteresting compared to the far more interesting questions surrounding who built the underground labs that seem to all be linked by these massive subway stations. This goes even further with one of the most interesting twists I've seen in a game in a while. After fighting through the subway, you hitch a ride on a train that the Lutadors have been using to move equipment and enslaved civilians. This brings you to an identical subway station, but when you fight your way up and open some blast shields, you discover something that reveals everything you know is a lie. You don't live on your own planets, and the Lutadors aren't aliens like initially thought. You live in these separate habitat domes connected by a massive space station with trains connecting them all from below. It creates a really cool image, and despite having some questionable plot holes, it's still interesting to think about. Though when Leo says, "How could we have not known?" he's 100% right. It doesn't make that much sense given that technologically, they're around the same level as we are now, maybe even slightly ahead. You'd think at some point they would have attempted to go into space or dig low enough into the ground to get oil. The underground subway really isn't all that far down, so it's surprised they haven't run into these sooner. It's also weird to think about the fact that the Lutadors found it first, but that might just be due to the condition of their dome. It seems as something went horribly wrong as lava lakes and rivers flow through their cities and zero-gravity zones are numerous. It's said that they used to all be identical domes, and with how fucked up their dome is, it explains why they turned into savages. After fighting through some of their posts, you eventually find where the Lutadors have been keeping all the children, and this is where the constant not thinking before acting that Davis does comes into play again. Instead of quietly helping the children there, you scream out for Layla, ignoring the rest of the children to the point where your character literally says in front of another kid that this was all in vain. Like, that's some serious fuck them kids energy.
Help us, please!
All in vain. It's all in vain. She's not here.
Plus, with all the yelling your character did, you caught the attention of the Lutadors and get captured again. This cuts to the point that was shown at the beginning of the game where you see Davis and Leo tied up and about to be sacrificed. This is where I'll leave it off talking about the story, but it does wrap up shortly after this, and the ending is interesting if nothing else. The gameplay is where things start to blend together with Gears of War. It feels like the same game, but with less polish. As you'd expect, the cover system is the same, using the A button to attach yourself to cover, but also for sprinting and rolling. From cover you can blind fire or leave cover to aim, pretty standard stuff. The guns feel similar, if not a bit weaker, but that's thanks to the sound design itself just sounding a little off at times. Sometimes it sounds like everything is going through a noise condenser. Some of the guns themselves look very similar, especially the main Lutador assault rifle, which just looks like the Lancer Mark I with a longer blade. The gore and ability to shoot off limbs and pop heads is just as satisfying as Gears, even having the same squishy sound effect. Even some of the locations are strikingly similar, though the one unique thing this game adds is the grav-links, which allows you to shoot small blasts of low or high gravity fields. Hitting an enemy or the cover that the enemy is behind with low gravity will launch them into the air, allowing you to easily pick them off with a quick and satisfying headshot. Or if you're feeling extra mean, you can pull them towards you and kill them with a melee. Hitting an enemy with high gravity will slam them onto the ground and stop them from being able to move. However, this rarely ever comes in handy since slamming an enemy in cover will do nothing to expose them, and even if they're out of cover, they can still shoot while on the ground relatively quickly, unlike the low gravity which stuns them for a second or two before they can shoot. However, the gravity will also affect certain objects. Using low gravity can move objects out of the way and even allow you to throw them at enemies, including cars once it's fully upgraded. The high gravity is really only used in certain scenarios where you have to use it to progress, but doesn't really have much use beyond scripted events. You can create a shield with high gravity, but honestly I just forgot about that altogether. Going back to the upgrades I just mentioned, these aren't in a tree or anything like that. They're just tied to certain points in the story, and some are hidden collectibles that can be used to increase the amount of charge your gravlink has. Despite what I've seen and read online, I actually quite like the gravlinks and the change that it offers. While it doesn't save it from being a clone, it certainly adds a new element to the mix that's a lot of fun to play with and comes in handy often. I do think more could have been done with it, but rather than judging it on what it's not, I appreciate what it is. However, I do think that some of the best elements behind this whole inversion concept weren't used as often as they should have been. The most interesting fights in the game took place when you were fighting enemies on different planes of gravity. It made for fun spectacles, and the fact that it only happens 3 or 4 times throughout the entire campaign is disappointing, especially considering it's never used in moments that could have made it more memorable, like a boss fight. Having a boss fight where the planes of gravity are consistently changing while the battle progresses would have been an incredibly memorable moment. Instead, it just acts as transitions between areas with generic enemies you fought throughout the the entire game. Then you have your zero gravity areas, which are far more of a slog than they really should be. They offer very little difference from regular fights, with you just having a lot less control than you normally would. Now in order to move, you have to press A to push yourself from cover to cover with an incredibly finicky targeting system that will see you accidentally go into a platform you didn't want to traverse to because it decided to change what you were targeting last second. They also introduce an incredibly annoying enemy type exclusive to these areas that can quickly leap from platform to platform and can tank far too many hits. They're entirely melee, but with how quick they move versus your lack of mobility, they can kill you with no chance of fighting them off. As cool of an idea as the zero gravity fights are, they just wind up being boring and annoying, plus unlike the other altered gravity battles, they're used really often in the later half of the game. Where I think this game struggles the most though is in its pacing and repetition. I think the first hour of the game is a bit annoying with how often it interrupts gameplay with cutscenes, and some of them feel completely pointless. I like the storytelling, but you don't need to stop me walking just to show me slowly approach and open a door to start another fight. I could easily do this in gameplay and it'd flow better. Luckily after chapter 3 they stopped doing it as often, and when they do it's usually to actually progress the plot. The repetition on the other hand becomes a real issue in the later half of the game. This is especially true with the boss fights, which is really disappointing. They're shown to be these unique boss fights complete with cutscenes and their own personalities, which makes it all the more weird when you have to face them again. There are only 4 real bosses excluding the final boss, and they're all repeated throughout the game. I mean, you fight the slave driver not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. Even worse is that the method of killing them never changes. It has the same mechanics the first time you fight them that it does in the last fight. Being this way, it really helps contribute to my earlier thoughts that the luchadors themselves are the least interesting aspect of the game. When you can't even make unique bosses each with their own mechanics, why would I find them interesting at all? I wish I could say the bosses were the only thing that suffered from repetition, but even the locations tend to blend in over the course of multiple chapters. Then you have these horrible turret sections of the game, where you have to slowly work your way past a turret firing at you to blow it up from behind. The same mechanics again carry over multiple times, where you have to use heavy gravity to get objects to fall so that you can use them as cover and sprint between them. It's also pretty insane how fast a turret can target you, so even when you're doing things right, you can get shot down pretty quickly. I played on normal and I can't imagine how infuriating these sections would be on hard. I assume the thought behind these would be to have your co-op partner distract the turret, but obviously the AI isn't smart enough to do that, so it's constantly focused on you, making these sections really annoying, and you have to do it like 4 times throughout the game as well. For being a late 7th generation game running on an Xbox 360, it does look shockingly good, even if it does suffer from the same issues that a lot of games running on Unreal Engine 3 do. The frame rate is usually pretty steady, but can dip from time to time. The texture pop-in can be really bad, and the colors are a bit washed out. But a lot of that does come down to the hardware it's running on rather than the game itself. In the end, the story is the main appeal here. I think the world itself is interesting, and the characters have decent enough chemistry to hold the story together. I think it would have been better if they made the luchadors a little more interesting, as they're as bland as you can get, but with more going on than just them, the story is still a redeeming factor. The gameplay isn't bad by any means, it's just very similar to Gears of War. The gravity inversion stuff could have played a bigger role, but the gravelings are fun to play with and can be pretty useful. The repetition, however, is a massive downside. With repeated sections, boss fights, and even locations, it can get pretty annoying. Considering how cheap you can pick up a copy now, it's not a bad choice. There are certainly worse third-person shooters out there. At least with the similarities to Gears of War, you know if you liked those games, you'll likely like this one too.